Alright, troops, are back, of course, to talk about some FF7. We're here to look at this massive video that Square Enix put out a handful of days ago. That hour-and-a-half video, kind of talking about Rebirth. We looked at it briefly, but it was like the ending of the video where they give us a little bit of something for part 3. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a video on this, but I did see that Max did it. His video's so goddamn long. It's almost 3 hours. But I also had somebody hit me up on Twitter in the DMs telling me that it's worth talking about. So here we are. Per usual, I'm going into this relatively blind. I don't even know what all is worth discussing in this video. I don't know if our video is going to be 3 hours long like Max's video, if it's going to be a 20-minute video. I have no idea. I don't even know, right? I've only seen the beginning to make sure that my subtitles are working, and the very end that we've talked about previously. With a video like this, I really appreciate any kind of support. We don't do this too often at the beginning of our videos, but the likes, the comments, the subscribes, things like that, just because this is such a massive undertaking. If I just want to sit here and watch the video, it would take me an hour and a half, much less like stopping and talking and editing and all that other shit. It's going to take me several hours just to do this. As is pretty standard on the channel with this kind of video, it's not going to be like a reaction video. We're just going to be watching off camera and coming back and discussing the things that I think are worth talking about. Let's hop into it. So actually the first thing we talk about is from the very beginning of the video. I think it's like showing clips from like throughout the video just to kind of hype up what's going to be in the future. But I think it's the art director, the bald guy, mentions the way that Sephiroth gets out of the truck at the very beginning of the game, which I never noticed, but it's actually like kind of interesting. And even like the host that's asking the questions even says that he wouldn't have noticed it if he never pointed it out.
セフィロスの折り方にすごく注目してほしいですよね。本当にセフィロスらしい思い切ったちょっと思い切った感じにしてます。
今確かに今シュッて横に一歩でそこ言われないと気づかないっすわ。なるほど。
こういうところの積み重ね。
Yeah, it's just kind of cool. Like something I never noticed. The way that Sephiroth just kind of jumps down to the side while everybody's like running down the ramp like normal people. It is very Sephiroth, as he says. Also, as you can tell, the subtitles are over subtitles. I don't know why that is. That for some reason with the VOD they put on YouTube, there's Japanese subtitles, even though the video's in Japanese. And obviously adding the English subtitles, it just kind of obscures the subtitles a little bit. Nothing I can do about that. Next up, Hamaguchi talks about how the grasslands is, of course, the first area that we kind of visit with the game. But that is actually the first area they actually worked on, and they use it as kind of like a testing ground to make these like bigger zones and regions and kind of test all the stuff. And I thought that was just kind of interesting just because the fact that it was like the first area they were making and testing things in, and it ended up being one of my favorite areas in the entire game. It's kind of, there's not necessarily get worse as they go for me, but it's like if we go back to my like ranking the regions like video I did, it was like Junon and then Grasslands and I think maybe like the Nebel region or something like that. But it's like the earlier regions where they were testing everything ended up being my favorite. And a big part of the reason why I do like the Grasslands is all the different biomes, because you have obviously the Grasslands itself, but there's like a little bit of beach area here and there, and then there's like the swampy area, and then there's like the whole desert near Calm and stuff that kind of leads to Midgard. It's very diverse, maybe the most diverse area in the entire game, and I think that's a big part of why I like it.
ここが一番最初のワールドマップになるので、試作する時もここのワールドマップから一番最初開発チーム入って広さ感とか遊びのこうゲームのコンテンツの量みたいなのを試作する、マップとして使ってました。
すげえな。
Hamaguchi further goes on to say that like a lot of fans have responded pretty positively about them recreating the world map when it comes to Rebirth, and kind of people were wondering how they're going to handle that. And I think overall I can agree with that, even if I have some gripes with some of the regions. I think it exceeded expectations pretty much overall. The real complaint, if you want to call it that, would be the ocean, just because there's kind of nothing to do with it. You have a couple little locations you can go to fight the monsters, to get the pieces for the side quest, to create the accessory. But besides that, and collecting like the pirate's jetsam or whatever it's fucking called in the ocean for crafting, it's just kind of pointless.
今作はやっぱその原作にもあったそのワールドマップっていうのをどういうふうにこうリメイク作品で再創作してくるかっていうのがやっぱり多くのユーザーが求めてるというか期待してるところだったと思うので、非常にいい感想をいただけているので、そういう意味でやっぱりこう作った作品に対しては非常にこう自信を持てるようなこうタイトルになったなっていうのが思っています。
So we're able to skip forward several minutes, about the 8-minute mark or so, where they're talking about the original FF7, and something that they've talked about before in other videos is that like when somebody's working on like a location, it's like just them working on it, like an individual person. But Hamaguchi brings up to Toriyama that he'd heard that whenever a person was working on a particular location in the original FF7, they were able to like influence the story and kind of write whatever they wanted, essentially, if they felt like things were lacking or whatever the fuck. And like Toriyama kind of confirms that. Obviously, at the end of the day, Nojima got to like finalize everything. I thought that was kind of interesting just because I don't think I've ever heard that before, that like if you're working on a particular area in the OG FF7, you get to kind of impact the story. Kind of cool.
時ってなんかもうストーリーから結構ロケの担当の人が書いてたりとか。
足りないところは全部その僕らが自分らで作って、ボイスが収録なかったんで、
もう足すことはできたってこと。
そう、足すのも結構自由にできたし、足りなかったり、あとちょっと面白くないなと思ったら自分で直して入れてみたのを最終的に野島さんが直してみたいな 形でやってましたね。
Moving forward a bit, we have Takai, which is the art director, talking about making the original FF7 and how they had to like. He was doing like the Mana series before then, and how he'd never done 3D before, worked with polygons. They had to buy like some high-end equipment, but they didn't really have shit like that in Japan back then, so they had to get English manuals and get them translated as they're using them to like kind of learn how to operate this shit. The OG FF7 definitely has like problems and stuff like that, but for the most part, like it turned out to be, you know, pretty great game. It's obviously very iconic, and it's just kind of crazy to think with how rough development was that it turned out as iconic as it is.
まあ当時ディレクターの沢口さんがもう次はポリゴンだみたいな 3D だみたいなやっぱガッと掲げたので、まあうちらデザイナー当時のデザイナー全然誰もわからないんで、
どうやりゃいいんだろうと。
やっぱ 3D ツールとかもやっぱ日本ではなかったので、やっぱマニュアルとか全部英語でなんかそれをこう翻訳しながら。もうこうなんかもうそもそも Z 軸ってなんだみたいなところから知らない軸がそうそう X と Y しか知らないよみたいな。
But jumping ahead a bit again, they're talking about changes from the original game to Rebirth, and they're mostly talking about the ship, which is the cargo ship in the original game. It's like a ferry cruise ship sort of thing now. And how whenever like Hamaguchi had an idea of like, okay, the pacing's kind of off here if we just do the Genova fight again, and how about we add a mini game and go into Toriyama? Toriyama already had the idea to add like the Queen's Blood card game there, the tournament. And it's kind of cool to see that like multiple sides of the development team had the same idea on pacing. Like even Toriyama was like, okay, the pacing's off here, we gotta kind of add something, which is true. Like the cargo ship is kind of cool in the original game, but it is a little bit of a forgettable scene. I mean, obviously you fight Genova and you have a run-in with Sephiroth and all that shit, but like they had to like spice it up and add some new shit. And I think the Queen's Blood tournament is pretty good.
ところとかもなんかこちらで何かしらちょっとこういきなりこう原作同様みたいにそのジェノバの方のこう襲われる方の緊迫感の方に行っちゃうとやっぱちょっとメリハリも弱いのでなんかそこに対して一個ミニゲーム的なものを挟んでちょっとこうやってから行かせたいですっていう話をしてたら豊田さんからここはもうクイーンズブラッドを入れることに決めたって言ってすごい盛られて戻ってきたりとかそれはお互いこう結構空気を読みながら
Also mentions that whenever the cutscene team came to him with the idea of Red 13 in the Shinra outfit and also dancing, that he thought they were going a little too far and they were joking with him, but by the end of it, of course, he did enjoy it.
やっぱそこでこうなんかレッド13がまあシンラのこう服を着てまあちょっとしたこうまあこう軽快なダンスみたいな演出で最初やっぱりこうレイアウトを最初チェックするときにカット新版から上がったりしたときにこれはちょっといくらなんでもやりすぎじゃないっていうふざけすぎじゃないかなと思ってたんですけどでも実際こう完成品してのを見て全然ありだなと思って。
I thought that was kind of interesting just because I talked about this years ago on my channel. I did a video even before the first remake game came out that like things we might not see in the remake project, and one of them was our group sneaking on board and like Red 13 wearing the outfit and all that shit because I thought it was just a little too goofy because even though it's like a fantasy RPG and all that other shit, magical world, like it wouldn't make sense for Red 13 to be trying to pretend to be a person when he's got red fur and claws and a flaming tail and all that other shit, right? And obviously when we got to Rebirth, it's not that because we're not sneaking onto like a Shinra cargo ship. It's a ferry cruise. We don't necessarily have to be in disguise or whatever. We're not trying to pretend to be Shinra troops and shit. I thought it's kind of interesting that the art director from OG FF7 into like Rebirth and Remake and stuff like that kind of agreed with that sentiment that it was a little too much. Now, obviously in the finished product, it's funny, it still works, it's great, but it's not the exact same scenario as it was in the original FF7 anyway, so it's fine if he's wearing the outfit. Actually, further goes on to mention he had a similar sentiment with the dancing scene for Cloud in Remake, which I can kind of agree with as well. Like, it's a funny scene for what it is. It's a little bit jarring for the character of Cloud to be doing that kind of dance, it's a little out of place, and that's kind of the point. But my thing is too, like, where did Cloud learn how to dance? Like, where did Cloud learn these moves? But also, how does he know the exact choreography of like the dance that Andre wants him to do? That's my only kind of gripe with it. It's Honeybee Inn, it's the wall market segment, so it's fine that they do goofy shit or whatever. But it is like a little like, whoa, what is Cloud doing?
その時もクラウドがミツバチの館でダンスするっていうのがあってそれも自分は当初は結構否定的でクラウドにこんなことやらせるのは全然合わないからキャラと全然合ってないじゃんとか思ってたんですけどやっぱ実際こう作ってみてみるとすごくいい感じでレッドのこのダンスとかもすごく良くてやっぱちょっと鳥山乗れないなみたいなさすがだなとか思いながらこう見てましたね。
Obviously, I don't hate the scene. That's part of like the FF7 charm, just the most crazy shit you don't expect to see. And like Cloud dancing is definitely one of them. I'm further adds to this that it was already decided from the beginning that Red 13 was going to wear the soldier's outfit, but that it was always going to be comical, even if they tried to play it straight, kind of further adding to what I said previously years ago that it wouldn't make any sense. Like, it was always going to be ridiculous him wearing the outfit, and that's why they went down the more comedy route with it.
はレッド13が兵士の衣装を着るっていうのは最初から決まってたんですよ。でその時にその兵士の衣装を着せてみましたみたいなのがその開発のリーダー陣の中で共有されたんですね。そうするとどう見ても面白い格好をしてるんですよ。
まあまあそうなっちゃいますよね。
でこれはだからまともにやってもちょっと
笑っちゃうと、
困っちゃうというかなんか、どっちみち面白いんだからより面白くした方がいいっていう方にそう振ったんですよ。そういうふうに。
It's kind of cool to see that, like, the art director for Rebirth and the OG FF7 and, like, the co-director for Rebirth and shit like that kind of agree with some shit I was saying years ago. And I think if you go back to that video, there's probably people in the comments that were, like, disagreeing with me and trashing me for saying stuff like that. I'm just like, dude, Remake's a little more grounded. It's obviously still going to be ridiculous at times, but it's a little more grounded world. You couldn't just pass off Red 13 as, like, a soldier, and that would work. Especially going to talk about, like, remaking iconic scenes, you know, from OG FF7 to Rebirth, and Toriyama mentions Red 13, and, like, you know, Hayden, his late father or whatever, but also like the Dyne Barrett stuff and trying to make them as like iconic as they were in the original game. And obviously that's a part where I disagree. I mean, I did a whole video about the Dyne Barrett stuff. I think for the most part it's handled well, but there's just a lot of missteps along the way with some of the stuff they do with the character of Dyne and the Dyne boss fight where he's turns into goddamn Magneto and shit with all this metal stuff, and you didn't even get a chance to like let the death of like Dyne and stuff and the weight of that scene set in because you're immediately attacked by fucking Palmer and a mecha frog and he's shaking his ass in the camera. It is just weird. There's certain stuff like that throughout Rebirth that I think is handled well for the most part, but then they like do this like weird thing like the Palmer fight.
コレルでの回想シーン友達とのダインっていうキャラとのエピソードのシーンとかは原作で確立されたものがあるんで。そこは逆に言うとすごく忠実に作ることでボイスを入れて、しっかりカメラをつけて、演出をするっていうことでさらなる名シーンになるかなというふうに最初思って、やっております。
Again, overall, I think the segment was handled well, but there's just other stuff. I don't want to go on a whole tangent here, but like you're supposed to have like the mystery of like, is Barrett the one doing these killings? Obviously, we know that Barrett wouldn't do that, but there's that mystery in the original FF7. You don't know there's another gun arm guy. And then, like, Dyne was, like, the leader of the desert prison in the original FF7, and in Rebirth, I don't even know what's his story. Like, what's he been doing all these years if he's not the leader of the prison anymore? He just randomly gets caught by Coates and his boys, and they tie him up in a shack in the scrapyard, and just so on and so forth. The pendant was something that I had a problem with. In the original FF7, he gives Barrett the pendant to give to Marlene. We never see the payoff of that ever in the compilation. And they put a lot of emphasis on the pendant in Rebirth. You see it all the time on Dyne's character model, but they don't even have him given the pendant to Barrett at all, which is weird to me. We're going to talk about obviously having to do like voice acting for the modern interpretation of it and how that might affect like the scenario writing and things like that. And they talk about obviously the flashback Cloud embodying Zack and like Zack's mannerisms and things like that. They're being coy about it. I'm going to be blunt with it because we all know. They talk about how like Sakurai did a really good job, kind of almost impressionist, like trying to act like the guy that I guess plays Zack when it comes to the Japanese side of things. But I think on the English side of stuff too, like Cody did a really good job with this as well, where there's a distinct difference between Cloud in the beginning of the game during the flashback versus the rest of the game in Rebirth and also Remake, right? Like, it's just this distinct difference. He does a really good job with like the Cloud voice of impersonating Zack, right? Like, it's really good. So if you are a fan of Zack, you pay attention to Zack and like Crisis Core and stuff like that, right? I think he did a really good job. It's just a testament to how good Cody is as well. Also further adds that with like the first take they did, it was like too entertaining and too much of a spoiler. I guess like doing too good of a job impersonating Zack that they couldn't use it and he had to like redo it.
面白すぎるし、ちょっとネタバレも強すぎるから逆に抑えてくれっていうような演出をしたりとかっていうことをやっておりますね。
After this, they watch the scene of Cloud and Sephiroth getting out of the truck to fight the dragons, and they point out that it's meant to show how much cooler Sephiroth is than Cloud, and like that's why Cloud's like slipping around in the mud and the rain and stuff like that. And kind of the only problem I have with that is that obviously this is meant to actually be Zack, right? And at this point in the continuity and stuff, like Zack is a soldier first class, and I know Zack's a little bit clumsy in Crisis Core. I mean, he even gets like tripped by Genesis and Benora at one point and stuff like that. But again, at this point in the story, he's a more matured Zack, where he's already lost Angeal, he has the Buster Sword, he's joined the Soldier, which he always wanted, Soldier First Class or whatever. And I think it's a little bit weird to have him, technically him, be portrayed that way, because he just wouldn't be. He's a fucking soldier. He'd be bodying these dragons alongside Sephiroth.
クラウドがセフィロスはかっこよくてクラウドはかっこ悪いみたいな感じに見えるように雨でこけたりとかっていうのをやってます。
We're up to the part of the video where Takai talks about the way Sephiroth gets out of the truck, which we talked about towards the beginning of the video. But he mentions us hitting the monster with the truck, which I don't think I've ever known was supposed to be the case, because you don't see us hit the monster in Rebirth. They don't say anything about us hitting the monster with the truck, and in the original FF7, as far as I remember, it's never implied that we hit the monster, but that's what he says.
あれあったんですけど、セフィロスが、モンスターが出て、トラックが止まって、後ろが開いて。
So they're going to talk more about the Dying and Barrett segment, which we've already kind of discussed it, get my thoughts on it. We're not going to focus on that. But they do mention that between Remake and Rebirth, like the Barrett voice actor changed, which I don't think I knew. We usually kind of are on top of that stuff, but I don't think I ever seen that in like news or anything. They've mentioned him doing a great job, but on the English side of stuff, like I can't imagine it not being John Eric Bentley. Like if for some reason he didn't reprise the role for the second game, they had to get a different guy to do Barrett's voice, I just don't think it'd be the same. Funnily enough, right after where I stopped the video at to talk about that part, Toriyama mentions that nobody actually even knew the voice actor had changed until they had officially announced it. So maybe that's why I didn't know.
おかげさまでですね、ほとんど、その発表するまでは誰も気づかなかったっていう、その変わったこと。
すごい船木さんもね、役者冥利に尽きると思いますよ、それ。
Actually, right after this, Hamaguchi mentions that they didn't even know that the voice acting had changed because the development team often have like placeholder actors that do the lines and stuff. I guess maybe to like help with like making the scenes and shit until the actual voice recordings come in. But they didn't even know until like near the end of development that the voice casting had changed as well.
開発にも伝えてなかったんですよ。変わりましたね。本当に最後の最後に開発にも共有したんで。でよく開発ゲーム作ってる時って音声をあらかじめちょっと違う人で先行して仮で撮ったりする場合もあるんですよ。なんでなんか最初の時一番最初確かに上がってきたバレットのセリフってちょっと聞くと違和感を感じてたけど、多分開発スタッフはこれ仮ボイス上がってんのかなって多分思ってて、
なるほどなるほど。
で一瞬 Hopping forward a bit again, they're talking about the date scene, and Toriyama mentions how like meticulous it was, and how like kind of by the end of it all they're kind of sick of it because there's so much into it. Because I think there's like different variations to all the date scenes depending on your affections. Like say even if you get Tifa in the date scene, I think if your affection's not like super high, you don't get like the kiss. I think it's like a different scene, if I'm not mistaken. There's even like if you go in the settings, you can change up like kind of like how the scene plays out, like the high affection or like low affection or something like that. I can't remember exactly. It's kind of interesting because I don't think I've seen all the scenes. I haven't like watched. I wonder if there's like a compilation of that on YouTube of like every possible date scene, but also every variation of every possible date scene. I'm not sure somebody's done that yet.
このシーンに対して5分岐とか7分岐とかやらなきゃならなくて、もう確認するだけでも時間がかかるんで、もうちょっとコリゴリですよね。
みんなゴールドソースはコリゴリになってしまった。
開発者はどうです？
俺はひどい。本当ひどい。
Then start talking about making the world and like the grasslands area specifically, which we kind of looked at a bit of that near the beginning of the video. But they go on to like showing like some development footage of the game, like kind of the early footage when they haven't really added the detail to the world, and it's just kind of cool to see. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I don't know if that's like exclusive to this video, if that's like footage you can see elsewhere or something.
どういう映像だ？ああ、なるほど。そういうことか。
一番最初こういう荒いやつから作るんですよ。
いきなり完成しちゃったけどこんなすぐやか
もうちょっとフェーズがあるんですけどね。
さっきのがいきなりこれがもう
一番最初こういうんで大きさ感とか広さ感を見つけたり
おすごいな。
It's just really cool to see them like talking about the shit and seeing in the background like kind of the rough draft version of the game, and then it like cuts to like the finalized version to seeing like the comparisons. It's pretty cool. It kind of makes you want there to be like almost like a demake of the game, but like with that early version, like a playable version that looks just like that, where it's almost like Fortnite-y kind of cartoon looking, but like being able to like play the whole game like that. That'd be kind of cool. I'm just kind of randomly throwing this in the video too. I'm at about the hour mark, I think like 57 minutes or some shit, but Teruki Endo's there, the battle director obviously for Remake/Rebirth, kind of hasn't really been asked a lot of questions. It's kind of weird that he's there. I mean, I know because of the beginning of the video, he's gonna like talk about combat a bit, obviously. But still, like, it's only an hour and a half video. I'm already an hour in, and he's barely been asked any questions and barely weighed in on any topics. It's just kind of weird. It's kind of uncomfortable to see him back there just, like, probably wanting questions, and he's not really getting any. Takai's talking about, like, creating, like, the art and assets and stuff like that for the Gold Saucer, and he himself was surprised with, the finished product in, like, the hotel room, how, like, detailed it is and stuff. And he actually mentions that he wanted a Tonberry humidifier of his own. And Hamaguchi says they actually hit up the merchandise department about that, about actually making a Tonberry humidifier, but he hasn't heard back from them.
ぐらいなんですけど、ここまでやるんだみたいなところもありつつ、トンベリの貸し付けは欲しいですね。
これMD 部に一回行ったことがあるんですけど、 苦笑いされた以降何も戻って
You get to a part where they're talking about like the different vending machine designs that are kind of in the world and stuff like that. And Toriyama makes a good point that I've seen the community talk about how like convenient the vending machines are and other things like the benches and like whatever the machine is where you can like fuck with like your character's like kind of sphere grid looking thing where you like do your stats and shit. And Toriyama mentions how like they're just too convenient, so nobody ever goes into the shops, which is something I've actually heard people talk about. Like Magnata Books or whatever the bookstore is called, where you go to upgrade your character, like you don't ever have to really ever access that, other than a part of the story, I think, where they make you go there, I think in like Under Junon or whatever. Actually, I just played a little bit more, and specifically Toriyama mentions Magnata Books, which is kind of funny.
全部取ってるし、だけどこっちが便利すぎてみんなショップに寄って
そうか
なんならこっちセール品までありますからね
全部こっちに取られるっていう
あんなに分厚く作った
しかも室内もすごい作り込んであるのにみんなこっち行っちゃうんですよ
確かにそうだ
そうかそういう弊害もあったんですね
魔導書店とかね。
魔導書店確かに絶
あれは
対
ね
街のショップで使うことない
It's kind of funny that the devs didn't like catch that when making the game, but they see that now with the players actually playing the game, that it's just like it's so much more convenient just to use the machines. So maybe that's something they change in the third game, either get rid of the shop entirely or cut back on the vending machines a bit to where you have to go to the shops a little more often. Or I'm just confused why we even have to use the vending machines or like Magnata Books to even upgrade our characters at all anyways, whenever you could just upgrade your weapon cores in Remake just from the menu. I don't know why we even have that option at all in Rebirth when it was so much more simpler in Remake. Actually, just kind of thinking about it too, just looking back at like past Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy X, you had the sphere grid, you do that all yourself from the menu. 12 had the license board, 13 had the Crystarium, 15 had whatever, I can't remember what it's called right off the top of my head, where you unlock like abilities and stats and stuff for your character. I don't know, and then Remake did that too with like the weapon cores, it was all in the menu. I don't know why they actually changed that for Rebirth. It's kind of strange. And kind of in a similar vein to like the vending machines versus shops thing, they talk about the notice board a little bit, and that's something that I have a little bit of opinions on too, just because like it's kind of like 50-50 that I use the notice boards in Rebirth, because a lot of times you can just go to the NPC giving you the quest and pick up the quest, right? I don't know if there's any quest that specifically like you have to go to the notice board to get them. Maybe there are, I'm not sure. But like I just didn't really find myself using it that much. I was under the impression they were going to be like optional kind of side, like different kind of quests, maybe something similar to like hunts from 12 or 15 or something like that. It's kind of just where you can go pick up the side quests, but you can also see like the NPCs on the map. If you pull up the map, you can see like where the green icon is. You can just go to the NPC and pick up the quest. It's obviously a little more convenient to just go to the notice board and grab all the quests that are available, but still, I didn't find myself using the notice board as often as I thought I would.
こうクエスト掲示板は飲み屋の前に置くみたいなのをなんか言ったかもしれないです
一応なんかそれっぽいルール、人が集まりそうなところには掲示板が、でもいやみんな掲示板行っちゃうから LPC 対応聞かないでください
結局ね便利になるとね
Yeah,
I think that's something they could kind of fuck with a bit in the future too. Like, I don't necessarily want like the notice board to just be like miscellaneous, like fetch quests, like go here, kill this monster, go here, pick up this item. But maybe use like the notice board for like kind of smaller end quests that are just there for like extra like XP or extra like gil if you need the gil or something like that, or maybe extra crafting items, something along those lines. And it's not that inconvenient to travel to a specific NPC and pick up a side quest, right? Like every RPG does that. It's nice to have the notice board give you the ability to like pick up all the side quests at one time, but it's really not that inconvenient to travel. Especially considering that none of the side quests are missable. So even if like there's a side quest in a region that's on the other side of the map, you can be like, I'll just do that later. I'll just come back in a couple chapters, I'll come back and do that side quest. Like, you don't have to do them right away. So, like, it's not a big deal if you don't get the side quest right now. So finally, with like 20-something minutes left, they start asking Indo questions. They start talking about like battle stuff. And he talks about how, even though like as good as like Remake's combat system is, he says that he felt like it was a little narrow, which I think is kind of crazy because it's still pretty intricate. It's obviously more intricate with Rebirth. It's a little more in depth, obviously. Crazy to think that even how good Remake's combat is, like he felt like there was more that could be done even back then. Also mentions that he joined up part way through the development of Remake, and that like even though he is obviously like the battle director or whatever, like the combat style for Remake was already decided ahead of time. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if I knew that or not.
プロジェクトの最初で途中から参加させていただいたんですけど、その時最初にもう決まってたのはアクション性を取り入れたいっていう話があって、ただちょっと個人的にはその完全にアクションに振っちゃうと、なんかその原作にあったコマンドの戦略性っていうところが、結構なくなるのはすごい惜しいなっていうのがあったんで、かなりこう基礎固めに集中しちゃったんで、そこでちょっと幅を狭くしてしまったなっていう後悔があったんで、せっかくリバース出るんだったら、じゃあその時のそのやり残したことというか、できなかった幅を広めるっていうところで リバースはもうそこに全力投球して、まあ基礎はもう
Hamaguchi goes on to talk about the combat system a bit and how obviously they knew they were going to do like action and command style, but they couldn't get to work in the earlier stages, which is when they brought in Endo and he kind of fixed everything, which is kind of cool to see, like them give him props and stuff like that. And obviously it makes some sense him coming off of like Monster Hunter and stuff.
でも気持ちよさがどうしても上がらなくてですね。
爽快感が。
でそこにどこに答えがあるかがちょっと分からなくて、チームもしばらく結構こう苦戦してた時があって、まあその時まさにうちのチームに合流してくれたんですよ。でもう一瞬でここからでも半年ぐらいででも大体形にしたよね。
まあでも確かに相当時間はかかったです。
結構チンチンな状態で。
まあそうそう。
Kind of cool to see too, just because as I mentioned previously in the video, like he hasn't got to like talk a lot or answer a ton of questions throughout the video. And here towards the end, when they're talking about like the battle system, of course, that's where his focus is. And it's kind of seeing like everybody like giving him props and stuff, and how he kind of helped everybody. He kind of turned like the combat around in like 6 months or something. They said it's kind of crazy.
立ち上げて
当時こうカプコンからすごい人が来るみたいな。
いやもうやめてください。
前振りがあって。
やばいやばい。
すげえ緊張する。
アクションマスターが来るぞ。
そう。
やばいやばい。
とんでもない人が来るみたいな。
やばいやばいっすよ。
もう実際本当にすごい人が来た。
いやいやいや。
でも
でも本当にそういう意味だと本当にリメイクのバトルシステムを最後こう作り上げてくれたのは本当もう彼の。
Endo also gives us a little bit of like insight on how like some of the synergy attacks were made, how like from the very beginning they know whether it's going to be a ranged attack or not, like kind of the distance of the attack. And then also like very early on they know how many like frames the attack's going to be, and then they pass it off to the motions department and they kind of craft it from there.
連携って発注的にはなんかこういうのっていうのって企画から出すんですか？でももうデザイナー側がこんないいの思いついちゃったみたいに戻してくるんですか？
まあ基本的には企画側は性能面というか、まあここは遠距離がいいなとか、まあこういうのは最低限満たしてほしいとか、距離感とか、そういう条件だけは必ず決めて、あとは一旦そのモーションの方にお願いして、まあフレーム数とかも指定はするんですけど、それで作ってもらって。で出てきたものがまあ結構こう遊びを。
They also specifically talk about like the Barret and Aerith like synergy attacks where they put on the glasses and stuff, and how like once you start doing like comical synergy attacks, they try to do too many, and because they set down a rule like the very beginning more or less of like a certain percentage could be comical, which I think is fair because you don't want like too many jokey looking attacks. Obviously, like Kate Sith is kind of a jokey character, so I think a lot of his are kind of funny looking, sort of. But yeah, I think it makes sense. Like you want some mostly serious attacks, I would say.
受けちゃうとああいう路線でまとめようとする傾向もあるんですよ。ですから
全部が面白いになっちゃダメだ。
そうそう、だから割合だけ最初に決めたんだよね。コミカルなの
を。そうですね。連携アビリティ。
Endo goes on to talk about how when they were making the game, they actually brought in Hamaguchi at times to like help them with shit, and he was more of like a player at that point than he was like a director. And now he had like really good ideas, and it's just kind of cool to see because I don't know. I know the games he's worked on in the past, like Final Fantasy XII and shit. I just don't know like entirely what all he's done. If he's worked on like combat stuff before, but it seems like he has a pretty good eye for like some changes that can be done to like combat and stuff for games, which is kind of cool to know. Which I guess makes a bit of sense why he's like the director, because you got to have like a good eye for kind of everything. It's not just about like overseeing certain stuff. You got to know kind of how everything works, and like it's kind of cool that he, I guess, understands like the combat stuff and what changes can be made.
そうですね、まあリメイクからではあるんですけど、ある程度ゲームがこう通して遊べるようになったりとかすると、まあ浜口さん中心にどんどんこうチェックプレイが始まるというか、ね、こうその時に浜口さんはもう完全にそのディレクターじゃなくてもユーザーになりきるんですよね、遊ぶ時に。で結構こういうのあった方がいいんじゃないとかっていう提案をくださるんですけど、割とみんなこうコストカツカツでやっててそうそう、でも僕としてもその浜口さんが言ってることがめちゃくちゃ納得がいくし、まあなんな
And that's pretty much it for the video, my dudes. It's not as long a video as I thought it was going to be. There's just not a lot that needs to be talked about. There's just stuff that we've already known. If you've been following the channel, we kind of talk about every little update that comes out for the game, like lead up to the release and like development and things like that, all that shit. There's a lot of stuff that we kind of already know if you keep up with all the information. And the last little bit that we haven't talked about in the video was like the part 3 related stuff, which we talked about in a previous video. You can go back on the channel, whatever the last video was with like part 3 in the title. As always, there's still a ton in the video we never discussed. I mean, it's obviously an hour-and-a-half video, and it's like a 20-something minute video. There's a ton that we skipped over. It's still worth watching. There's some interesting stuff that we didn't necessarily need to talk about in the video, so it's definitely worth like kicking back and watching at some point if you haven't already. Anyways, though, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new, search in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, _DaveYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought. but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.